Of course, I condemn Russia's invasion, and of course, I condemn the reasons for the provocation. I condemn the destabilization of the nuclear framework, which was the most important element of all in this. The United States walked out of the ABM Treaty and the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty unilaterally and would not negotiate with the Russians over this. The United States overthrew a government in Ukraine. The United States refused to negotiate with the Russians over basic security issues. This is a tragedy, but the core of the tragedy is U.S. unipolarity assumed by the neocons as early as 1992, put in place by Clinton starting in 1994, and it's been a consistent U.S. policy up until today, basically. And Trump is actually, amazingly, it seems, trying to change it, which is unbelievable for us. Now, again, as I said earlier, I went to Ankara to discuss this in detail with the diplomats. I know the details of what happened. Ukraine left the negotiations that could have ended this in March 2022 with few deaths, and instead there have been nearly 1 million deaths since then. This has been, unfortunately, a game of the United States for 30 years that Zbigniew Brzezinski spelled out in 1997. The U.S. thought they had the upper hand at every time. It was the economic sanctions or the weapons that were going to bring Russia to its knees. It was incredibly naive. I said so for many, many years. In February 2014, the United States participated actively in a violent coup to overthrow Viktor Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine, who favored neutrality. This is very important to understand. The coup took place on February 22nd, 2014. Again, I saw some of this with my own eyes. It was ugly, the U.S. involvement in this coup. U.S. forces paid for this coup to an important extent. They stirred up this coup. This is all well understood. The American role in this has been quite sordid for a very, very long time. The goal, starting back in 1994, was to expand NATO and surround Russia in the Black Sea region. President Clinton signed off on that in 1994. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote about it in the Grand Chessboard in 1997, explaining it, and explaining in a chapter that is completely wrong when you look back at it, said Russia will not be able to resist any of this. In 2002, the U.S. destabilized the relationship by unilaterally abandoning the anti-ballistic missile treaty. In 2008, the United States invited Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO, basically over strong objections by the Europeans, but the Europeans went along in the NATO Bucharest summit in 2008 over Russia's brightest red lines. This was all known, understood provocations. All of the diplomats knew it. European leaders knew it. I spoke with them at the time. Everybody understood this. Now, in 2015, the war could have ended with the Minsk II agreements, but the United States and Ukraine, despite the UN Security Council backing, said, no, you don't have to do that. That was not a territorial claim on the Donbass by Russia. It was a claim for autonomy that the UN Security Council unanimously supported, and the U.S. and the governments in Ukraine, at the U.S. behest to an important extent, completely dissed. Biden knew what he was doing. It was a terrible mistake of the Democrats, let me say, and of President Biden and his team. And then it's true that Biden and Putin met in 2021. In December 2021, President Putin put on the table a draft U.S.-Russia security agreement. It was a completely negotiable document. I spent quite a bit of time speaking with the White House about that document. There should have been negotiations. The U.S. rejected negotiation over the central point, which was non-NATO enlargement to Ukraine. Then in March 2022, just days after the start of Russia's invasion, but by the way, the war had been going on for years, but this escalation in starting February 22nd, 2022, just days after that, they went to the negotiating table. And they came very close to an agreement until the U.S. and Britain stopped it. Boris Johnson, one of the most irresponsible politicians in our modern time, explained it explicitly later. He said this is a war about preserving Western hegemony. Yes, this was a proxy war against Russia. This was the plan all along. And the U.S. and UK told Zelensky basically, leave. There's so many interesting things to say about Chinese statecraft and about U.S.-China relations. One place to start is that President Trump said yesterday or the day before, this Ukraine war, it's not about, we shouldn't be doing this. We have this big, beautiful ocean between us and the Russians. We're not in conflict with each other. Well, the Pacific Ocean is a lot bigger. China is not in a million years going to invade the United States, and the U.S. can't invade and defeat China. It's very simple. The two, if we're misguided, could provoke each other. The United States could do in East Asia what it did in Ukraine. The obvious analogy is Taiwan. If the United States continues to provoke to unilaterally arm Taiwan, this could trigger war. The war would be devastating for the world, but devastating for the United States, as every war game has shown. And as makes sense, you fight a war against China thousands of miles away from your shores. You think that's going to work in this day and age with new technologies, with the hypersonic missile systems attacking your naval fleets, with the continual space surveillance of the oceans and so on? Come on, this is so ridiculous. Even the idea is absurd. Now, that's one point. Well, the war is, of course, a war between the U.S. and Russia being fought on Ukrainian territory. It's not a war between Ukraine and Russia. This is the basic point. This goes back for 30 years in the Ukraine project of expanding the U.S. military reach eastward, basically, by the way, from Brussels to Vladivostok was the ultimate aim. In other words, this is U.S. hegemony at play, and President Putin said no. And the war broke out 11 years ago at the Maidan coup, which was also a U.S. action to a very substantial extent to overthrow a Ukrainian government that favored neutrality. And the Ukrainian public favored neutrality overwhelmingly. There was no move by the Ukrainian people to join NATO. This was a top-down push and coup in February. Russia is a very sophisticated economy filled with very sophisticated people and well-trained engineers. And by the way, as the world's largest land area with vast natural resources, the population is modest by big power standards at 150 million people, but we're entering an age where the number of people is not really decisive. There are going to be humanoid robots and AI systems and many other things. This incredible land area, the vast resources, the northern route, the Arctic route, something that is obviously on President Trump's mind, means that Russia is a great power, no question, for generations to come, and one that will play in increasing significance in the world economy. And this is partly what was discussed in Riyadh. So in this sense, the war started by the United States eastward movement and every other U.S. action, especially, by the way, and it's very much underestimated in its impact, the 2002 unilateral abandonment of the anti-ballistic missile treaty by the United States was, to my view, the most profound destabilizer of all, because ultimately we're talking about survival, nation state survival, national security, missile systems. This is what has been on President Putin's mind for 20 years. Keep your missile systems away from our border. This has been enunciated repeatedly. As Ray McGovern, the former CIA wonderful analyst, told us a few months ago, I've always believed, I've said for years and years and years and years, and the years are now quite long, that there are no fundamental conflicts between the United States and Russia. I'll say the same, that there are no fundamental conflicts between the United States and China. It seems that President Trump is pursuing that approach, which would mark a dramatic change of American foreign policy, a fundamental change, I would say, that is a break with the last 33 years. 33 years, why? Because when the Soviet Union ended in December 1991, the neocons, the believers in the United States, in the unipolar world that America and its unique military, financial, economic, technological power in their minds meant that the United States ran the world. We should always be cautious and careful when we're analyzing these events. But I have to say, I hope I'm not just getting swept up in it. It seems pretty momentous, what's happening right now. It seems more than the news cycle or the spin cycle. What has happened in the last few days is President Trump has respectfully spoken with President Putin and said the United States does not aim to run the world or to damage Russia's security. The United States government has acknowledged that NATO will not expand to Ukraine and to Georgia, which was part of a 30-year game played by the United States, very dangerous and violent game. And more than that, it was not only picking up the phone or having a discussion or having a meeting in Riyadh, but actually a rather impressive, it seems, move to normal relations, a restoration of economic relations, as you said, a new chapter, we hope and pray, for a stability of the nuclear arms framework. President Trump made remarkable statements, brief statements, but remarkable statements about three-way negotiations of Russia, China, and the United States to reduce nuclear arms, to avoid an extraordinarily dangerous and costly, quote, modernization of nuclear arsenal. There was another extraordinary statement by President Putin's spokesperson, Mr. Peskov, who said, our concern is not about Ukraine joining the European Union. Our concern is about military, security, NATO. This is quite different. Extraordinary, such a statement. So clear, of course, extraordinary in the context that it's so rational. I've always believed that. I've always said that Europe's greatest mistake was to co-locate NATO and the European Union in the same city. Almost an accident, by the way, when NATO headquarters left Paris. Shouldn't have gone to Brussels, but increasingly NATO and the EU became the same thing, two Europe's a devastating consequence because Europe lost its foreign policy, lost its autonomy, lost its sense, lost its voice, doesn't understand what's going on. And when you ask me, I'm here in Brussels. I was at the European Parliament yesterday. There is so much confusion in Europe because it's been years and years and years in which Europe simply gave away its foreign policy. So they don't have diplomacy. They don't know how to have diplomacy because they're so rusty at it. I've been saying to European leaders for years, go to Moscow, talk. You're on the same continent. You're neighbors. What are you doing? But they don't. They warmonger. And then yesterday, our Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, called for deep, and according to the headline numbers, truly deep cuts in the U.S. military. This has not happened for decades. And immediately, our congressmen and senators jumped up and down because they're on the payrolls of, or they're funded in their campaigns, or their families are funded by the military-industrial complex in the United States. So these are all extraordinary statements. Now, I don't know whether the Trump administration is going to follow that particular logic. Donald Trump loves oil and gas under the ground. This is not where our future lies in the 21st century, actually, but he loves it. It's not the basis of U.S. Well-being, U.S. prosperity. Now, there is, to put it a different way, no shortcut to economic well-being in a knowledge economy except knowledge, technology, systems, thinking carefully, basing decision-making on evidence, on science, and so forth. China is extremely good at that. Made in China 2025, which was an initiative launched a decade ago to come to the forefront of several technologies, succeeded because it was systematic, because it had a decade-long, if not 20 or 30-year-long forward vision. For the United States to succeed, it should do what it absolutely can do. We have wonderful universities, wonderful research centers, wonderful enterprises that are investing heavily in research and development, building the economy. It has nothing to do with war with Russia, war with China, fights over natural resources. It's knowledge, capacity, organization, science and technology. This is what we're really talking about right now. I think there are also a couple of basic points that are really important. For many centuries, many recent centuries, certainly the 20th century, the idea that control over natural resources was the decisive element of economic wealth, the military power, national greatness was taken for granted. And in the petroleum age, especially after Churchill put the British fleet on oil, this was the view. You have to control the Middle East. You have to control the natural resources. We're living in an age, of course, it may sound trite to say, but it's true. We're living in an age where it is technology, it is advanced technology, it is digital technologies, it is a knowledge-based economy that's the source of wealth, the source of well-being. And you don't need that physical control over natural resources in the same way at all. Incidentally, the protectionism that the Trump administration is putting in is also beside the point. It's a little sad. It's not getting to the point. If Trump will play to America's strengths, which is its deep educational excellence, its technological excellence, its human diversity, which is wonderful because I live in New York City. I hear English once in a while, and I love the fact that 200 languages are spoken. It makes it a great city that reaches the entire world and becomes a media and financial and technology diplomatic capital. This is the strengths. I think Trump gets a lot of this absolutely right. War is useless. This isn't about war. This is not about conflict and so forth. He gets that right. And if he can play to America's true strengths, this is going to be a golden age, exactly what he wants it to be. If he plays to, the short-term gimmicks, that thinking grab resources or somehow protectionism or something else, it will not quite work the same way. So one of the subtexts of the last 30 years was not only U.S. hegemony, but also make sure that there isn't a close German-Russian relationship. And that's, of course, the essence of the U.S. opposition.